I've only written 2 books so far. I'm finishing up my 3rd, but all of them grew out of my essential frustration with theories of post-Fordism. There was a lot of hand-waving about this transition to a post-industrial society, a post-Fordist economy, but very little sense of how that actually happened on the ground. There isn't like a magical genie that comes out of a bottle and says, boom, post-Fordism. So my first book and second book were about that. My first book was about the policies of the shift to a more financial economy and the changing business practices. And the second was about sort of cultural accommodations and legitimations of that transition. And I think there's something about historians that when we look at things, they seem different than sociologists. I think everybody has a certain set of approaches and they're all useful. We shouldn't just think ours is better or theirs is better. But I think when one does that, you start to see on the ground how change really happens. And I think that's one of the key advantages or key offerings that history has, is that we talk about how change really happens. It's not a static conception. It's not an equilibrium conception. It's change. And it's change through people and institutions, and seeing how those connect, when and where agency is possible in a world where often we don't have much choice at all. And so when I come to a project, it's through those kinds of questions. And I think we each have our own sets of questions, and mine largely revolve around power, largely revolve around inequity, and trying to think through how good people doing good work can end up with a society that doesn't work for everybody. And so my first 2 books were about finance. My current book project, tentatively called Temp, is about sort of the rise and fall of secure work in America. And it begins in the 1930s, and it looks at the rise of executives and office workers and factory operatives as part of this large post-war corporation. And then the last 2/3 of the book are about how it falls apart. So how executives become consultants, how office workers become temps, and how factory operatives become undocumented laborers. And as it happens, as the corporation itself becomes more fragmented and outsourced and subcontracted. And there's ways in which sociologists have written about this before, but it doesn't look the same to a historian. It doesn't look the same as you're actually tracing the path of the people making the choices, of the actual decisions that are being made. And it's not just a question of transaction costs being minimized, but about humans being moved around. And I think that's where my projects come from, trying to understand the human element within capitalism, as well as the inhumane element of capitalism and the interplay between the two of them.